Our first guest is Maggie Gallagher. She is chairwoman of the National Organization for Marriage. She feels that last week's ruling denies the vote of 7 million Californians, and she's calling it a slur against the majority of Americans. Ms. Gallagher joins us live from the ABC News Washington Bureau. Welcome, Maggie.
Hi.
Also with us today is Sean Eldridge, the communications director for Freedom to Marry. He believes that same-sex marriage should be legalized, and he said it is crucial to change hearts and minds in more states around the country. Mr. Eldridge also joins us live from the ABC News Bureau in Washington. Welcome to this program, Sean.
Great to be here.
And question of changing minds comes up in the remark that I just quoted you as saying. And Maggie Gallagher, I want to ask you, you're actually taking the opposite point of view and saying that the people of California voted and this court decision, as it stands at this point, overturns their votes. What about Sean's goal to change minds? How does that affect you, given that your side registered its point of view, his side wants to change your minds? Any chance of that happening?
Well, I'd like to change his mind too. I never give up on anyone out there, because I think this is about, the truth about marriage and the good of children and the common good of society. What makes this decision so electrifying and upsetting to those of us who disagree with Judge Walker is not only what he did, which he substituted his views for 7 million voters, but the way he did it. What he did was essentially put 7 million people on trial. He did not let them all into his courtroom, and he convicted all of those Californians of irrational bigotry. He thinks he's established in his courtroom a set of facts that are clearly not facts. They're judgments or conclusions. But it's really important that the American people recognize how you get to same-sex marriage if you're going to use the courts. You have to rule, as Judge Walker has ruled, that it doesn't matter whether a child has a mother and father, that there's nothing important or significant about the natural family bringing together the child's own mother and father. He ruled that we have now scientifically discredited the idea that that's a legitimate concern in our society. And perhaps most disturbing at all is that he has read into the record Catholic and Southern Baptist teachings and pronounced as a fact that these are animus and bigotry that should be discredited. If you're religiously motivated, your right to vote can be taken away according to this judge.
Maggie, to my question, does Sean's side have any chance of changing your mind?
Well, I never say never, but probably okay. I'm pretty confident that there's a reason why. That marriage is unique for a reason. Every society in human history until the last 10 years has understood that marriage is uniquely necessary. You have to bring together male and female to make and raise the next generation. And other relationships may be great, or maybe you think other things about them, but they're not marriages. And to claim that it's not discrimination to treat different things differently, and for our government to insist that it is discrimination is to try to ground our politics on a lie about human nature.
Do you think that your opponents are bigots?
No, I do not. I think that Americans are thinking through this issue every day. What I'm seeing is that more and more Americans are looking at their friends, they're looking at their coworkers, they're looking at their family members. They're realizing that they know gay people, many of whom are in long-term committed relationships, and I think most Americans are waking up and realizing that those couples deserve the same respect and the same protections as everyone else.
If that were true, then why is it that we're in a court of law trying to overturn the vote of not only the people of California, but of all of the states? Every 31 times out of 31 times, the majority of Americans have said, yes, we care about our gay and lesbian friends and neighbors and fellow citizens, but we do not believe that same-sex marriage is a right. We believe that to make a marriage, you need a husband and wife.
Sean,
so if you're persuading everyone, why are you
Please
in
be
court?
quiet. Maggie, please be quiet.
Sorry.
You had a very long run, and I'm going to get back to you, I promise you.
Thank you.
But I do want to go to the point that I don't think Sean is addressing, is whether you think, let's say, Maggie, and those who hold to her point of view strongly, can you hold that position and not be holding it because you're basically a bigot?
Well, I don't think that you can hold that position and say that you believe in our nation's core values of liberty and equal protection for everyone. I would love to address Maggie's question about the role of courts.
That's not my question, Sean. My question, Sean, is can you hold that position and not be a bigot?
I think you can. I think that Americans are grappling with this issue at their own pace, and I don't think that name calling is really what's productive here. This is about people's fundamental rights. This is about loving and committed couples who deserve the same rights and the same protections as everyone else. I don't think putting really heated names and labels on people is going to help this conversation move forward.
Okay, I'm going to bring you back in, Maggie, because I cut you off. Do you want to continue with your thought?
You're very kind. I think I got my thought in, except to say that this judge, I appreciate that, Evan. I think that this judge, however, has ruled that those 7 million voters are irrational bigots, whether he used the bigot word or not. That's the substance of the ruling.
Yeah.
So I'd love to address this issue of courts that Maggie raised. Throughout our country's history, the courts have played a critical role in protecting minorities and protecting the rights of minorities. And that's exactly what I think our founders intended. There are certain fundamental freedoms ingrained in our Constitution: the freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and the freedom to marry the person that you love, that don't belong at the ballot box. I think we should all be proud that courts are every day fighting to protect minority Americans throughout the country.
He does have you there, Maggie, in that there is a long record in this country, particularly over the last 50 years, of courts holding positions that are not necessarily popular at the time because they believe that what they're doing is upholding a basic human right, and I'm sure that you're familiar with that history. So your argument that it's wrong for a court to overrule something that's been passed by the majority is one that has proven not to hold up in the past in certain situations. What about that?
It depends on if it's in the Constitution. And the 14th Amendment was clearly designed to prevent racial discrimination, and that's why I think we all support Loving v. Virginia. That was correct. It's in the Constitution. But what liberalism is specializing in doing, particularly since Roe v. Wade, is developing complex legal theories about how certain words in the Constitution can now be interpreted in a brand new way that the people who passed those amendments never imagined. And I think that I think it's a big stretch to say that our fundamental right guaranteed in our Constitution is a right to gay marriage. The right to marry doesn't include the right to redefine marriage so that your relationships must be considered marriages. And most of the practical rights associated with a fundamental right to marry, to live with a person, to love a person, to have a relationship with those person, that's true now whether you're married or not. So it's really not what's at stake in this debate. In Loving v. Virginia, it was a question of whether you could legally enter a relationship. In Prop 8, it's about whether Californians are entitled to keep their historic understanding of marriage, or if one judge can tell all Californians that their ideas of marriage are wrong. And that's, I think it's wrong because it's not in the Constitution.
Well,
by the way, this is not the first federal judge to do this. Many people are mistaken. There was a federal judge in 2005 in Nebraska who did it, who was quickly overruled by the 8th Circuit. It's not just the majority of Americans. The majority of courts have rejected the idea that there's a right to gay marriage.
I want to bring Sean in. And Maggie, my name is John, not Evan. You've gotten on my bad side, but I'm going to forgive. Sean, come back in and respond to
what I see in the Constitution is a fundamental promise to all Americans of equal protection under the law. And what I think more and more Americans are starting to realize is that equal rights in this case means marriage rights for same-sex couples.
Is there any, there's a lot of blah, blah, blah going on here in that you're both retreating to talking points, and I understand that because you're committed to your argument. What I find interesting in the tweets that are coming in, most of them are siding at this point with Sean, but that doesn't really tell us very much because it's an unscientific poll. But what I want to know is whether either of you can see a way to any common ground here. Do either of you agree on anything? Can you agree on anything?
I think we agree on lots of things. I think we agree on lots of things.
Lay out some good points for me where you agree, Maggie.
Well, I mean, first of all, this is one issue, and it's a very important issue, and I think it's important to remember that even when we go to the mat for what we think is right, that we're all Americans here, and that, I believe in equal rights. I believe in the importance of the Constitution. I'm sure that Evan does too, and
no, you mean Sean.
Sean. That's I keep calling. I'm not calling you Evan. I'm calling Sean Evan. Sorry.
Okay.
My apologies.
Evan?
So I'm sure there are lots of things that we agree on. We're all having a big fight within America. We're all Americans here.
Right.
I don't know if Sean believes that there's that Roe v. Wade was rightly decided or not. But I do know a lot of gay people who are pro-life. I don't view this as me versus gay people. I view this as a question of an idea.
Right.
this idea that marriage, to make a marriage, you need a husband and wife because children need a mom and a dad. Is that good? Is it grounded in reason? I mean, should it be supported and sustained? And on that issue, I do think we fundamentally disagree, and that's what we do. I would say that if the truth is that more and more people are agreeing with Sean's point of view, then it's very puzzling why it takes one federal judge and why they don't trust the people of California to correct their errors down the road.
Sean, I had asked a question about, and the reason I'm calling you back, both of you, is you keep going to the same talking points that we've heard for 15 years, and it's tiresome. I want to ask you, Sean, again, the common ground question.
Sure.
Do you see a way that you and Maggie can, Maggie, I don't mean personally Maggie, but the points of view can find some sort of compromise? Is this a compromisable issue at all?
Well, I think that the common ground that most Americans can reach is that if you're going to discriminate against a subclass of the population, against a minority, you'd better have a really good reason for doing it. And what was so important about last week's trial and why we're talking here today is that we saw throughout the trial that the other side had no good reason for excluding same-sex couples from marriage. And I think that's why more and more Americans are agreeing with the freedom to marry. Even in California, in the last few polls, we've seen majority support for the freedom to marry for same-sex couples. And it's because I think people are waking up and realizing that when we embrace marriage equality, some families are helped and no one is hurt in the process.
All right, I want to very quickly read some of what's coming in via Twitter. I'm seeing, of course it should be legal. Being gay is just an orientation, and marriage is for the rights. It's fair and it's right. Similar point of view, somebody tweets in, absolutely, it's about human rights. As a person, I have the right to express my love to another person, even if they're a woman. I'm assuming that's from a woman. And now to the other side, it'll take me a second to pull this up. There they are. Shady Glass tweets against the right to gay marriage, no, because it's a sin against the Bible. A similar view, homosexuality is an abomination. It's not natural for man to be with man, woman to be with woman. It is sexual immorality. And again, so what's new there? We've heard all of this before. And you know what I'd like to ask each of you is to take 30 seconds and do it in only 30 seconds, starting with you, Sean. I want to ask you what's wrong if your side doesn't prevail. What's the harm? Tell me what the harm is if your side does not prevail, if gay marriage is not legalized.
Sure.
What wrong is done? 30 seconds.
The harm is that loving same-sex couples who have committed to spending their lives together, who take care of each other in good times and in bad, who share similar joys and similar challenges as every other couple, are being deprived of the personal significance of getting married, and they're being deprived of the critical safety net of rights and protections and responsibilities that come only with marriage. You know, we're seeing in 5 states and the District of Columbia the reality of marriage equality, which is that families are helped, no one is hurt, the sky hasn't fallen, and I think that the trend is clearly toward equal rights for gay Americans and the freedom to marry.
Maggie, what is wrong if your side does not prevail and gay marriage is made once and for all legal in this country?
I think a society that puts into its founding documents the idea that special respect for the natural family, for the bringing together of male and female, for the mother and father, a society that redefines that as bigotry and discrimination and hatred and inequality is going to have a really hard time bringing together men and women to make and raise the next generation. It's a challenge for those of us who are attracted in the opposite sex in a way that it isn't for those who are attracted to the same sex, to give our children a mother and father. And that's my first concern. I also have real problems with a democracy in which these core decisions are taken away from people and given to a handful of judges as a result of a trial, biased trial like the one that we had.
Just to clarify, Maggie, your feeling is that the harm done by having gay marriage made legal once and for all across the country is that it would actually damage, you feel, permanently the institution of marriage, including the institution of marriage between men and women, and that would harm families. Am I correct about that?
I think it's the end of one idea of marriage and the creation of a new one that's really not oriented towards children and their well-being.
Okay, I want to have Sean in a moment respond to that, but I want to have you respond to his depiction of what would be wrong. His depiction is the loss of the opportunity, as he describes it in D.C. and other places, for people who, as he describes, who are loving and caring to his families and to connect. those opportunities are lost. What about that?
Well, I think that gay people have those opportunities now. I'm not.
By a
This is
civil
not a
union?
debate about whether gay people are allowed to have relationships or families. It's even separate from the legal rights and benefits. I think you can point to those, and that's fair. In California, they had full civil unions. The reason it's a difficult issue is that at a deep level, it's a symbolic issue. It's about which view of the world matters, and so I don't think that you can slice and dice it in that way.
Okay.
People can love who they will. I'm not trying to interfere with anyone's love, but I do think that marriage has a purpose. It's rooted in something good and real, and that it should be sustained and transmitted, and that people will get hurt. Children will be less well protected in a society that redefines our current vision of marriage as based on bigotry and hatred.
All right, you've made that very clear, and I want to take that to Sean. Sean, as you've heard, Maggie has just said that she feels that it will hurt society, and it will hurt what already exists as the institution of marriage.
Right.
That there will be less marriage. I think she's basically saying rather than more marriage, which I think is what you are saying. So respond, because I think what she said is very heartfelt.
Sure, 2 points. I mean, one is this issue of children she continues to raise. And we have seen in study after study from the American Psychological Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, who have said again and again that children who are raised by a same-sex couple in that household are just as healthy, just as happy, just as nurtured as every other children. That's the first point. The second point is all of these fears about there being less marriage, about the institution being diminished, we don't need to think about this in the abstract. Let's look at DC. Let's look at Iowa. Let's look at New Hampshire. Let's see what's happening there. Families are helped by having the freedom to marry. No one has been harmed in the process, and no longer can we pretend that that's the case, because Americans can look at the reality in 5 states in the District of Columbia and now in California with this tremendous victory.
All right, we have a couple of minutes left. I want to give each of you a chance to summarize, and this will be without interference from me. Maggie, I'd like to let you go first. I'll give you a minute, and it starts now.
Well, first of all, just to respond, we don't have a single study that looks at a nationally representative sample of children raised by 2 couples, follows them to adulthood, and can say how they do compared to other family structures. We do have an evidence that there's a lot of good gay parents out there, and I'm glad to hear it, and I don't contest that. But the idea, the research really shows, within the limits that it is, that children of gay parents do about as well as the average child, which of course includes many children in various forms of broken homes, sadly. I don't know how to convey it, and I do think that we are in the process of seeing a rapid cultural shift, which is around the gay marriage issue. It's based on the ideas that people who promote gay marriage believe, not just about gay people, which is fine, but about marriage itself. And it's an emphasis on marriage as a right. It's an emphasis on marriage as a kind of expression of love, which is nice. The one thing that is very hard to reconcile with this cultural shift with is the idea that we're going to rebuild a society in which every year more children, rather than fewer and fewer, are born to loving mothers and fathers who are willing to raise them. And that is my goal. And I do not see how gay marriage it's consistent with
Maggie,
gay marriage to even attempt it. Sorry.
I gave you a minute. No problem. I gave you a minute and 20, so I'm going to return the same to Sean.
Sure.
Sure. Thank you. Well, I'd like to point to a very telling moment in last week's trial. In the opening arguments of this Prop 8 trial, the judge asked the leading attorney for the other side, the individual who was defending marriage discrimination, to articulate what harm would occur if same-sex couples were granted the freedom to marry. And the attorney for the other side's response was, "I don't know, I just don't know." They've run out of arguments, and we've seen in 5 states in the District of Columbia that helping families live their life better and be more protected is something that all Americans can believe in. I think most people across our nation believe in the core values of liberty and equal protection for everyone, and I think it's going to be a very proud day when all same-sex couples have the freedom to marry nationwide.
Sean, you know you had 20 more seconds, so I congratulate you. In the next debate, we'll owe it back to you. I want to thank both of you. I feel, I know I was pushing a little bit with both of you, but I think we shed a little bit more light than normally and a little bit more smoke. So I want to thank you both. Our first guest, Maggie Gallagher, who is chairwoman of the National Organization for Marriage. And I also want to thank Sean Eldridge, who is the communications director for Freedom to Marry. That's all the time we have to us today. Thanks to both of you. Thanks for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you.
We will see you back here next Monday at 12:30. I'm John Donvan.